You've had some videos that have gone kind of viral, so congratulations. As well as you've been consistently posting content and getting thousands of views on a lot of your videos. So what would you say is like, one or two things that were the most important in the first, say, 6 months of starting that allowed you to build up to where you are now?
Yeah, and I think this is a great question, and I love answering this because I think it applies to content regardless of what platform you're focused on. So whether you're trying to grow a YouTube channel, TikTok, Instagram, the most important piece that I tell people, and this is how I did it in my journey, is like figure out the topic that gets you excited, that gets you interested, because you have to think in the long term, like, what am I actually going to want to keep talking about forever? Like, if I start making content about, how locks work, I'm going to get pretty bored after I make like 5 videos. Like, I don't really care enough. So, find a topic that interests you, start making those videos. Think of like different ways that you could approach the same subject. So, for me, it was small business. And so, I'm talking about, the fundamentals of building the business, but then I'm also talking about like marketing the business. I'm talking about social media for the business. And then once you've kind of generated a bunch of different videos sort of around the same topic, you need to really focus on the analytics, which I know people hear that, they roll their eyes like, yeah, I know. But no one actually does it. No one actually goes and looks at the numbers and says, like, okay, but what videos are actually hitting with my audience? And I say this ironically enough, if you look at my YouTube channel, my most viewed videos are videos about like how to grow on YouTube. And yet I don't make a ton of videos about that topic. But that's just because, like, for personal reasons, again, coming back to this idea of like what gets you excited, I don't want to have a channel where all I do is talk about how to grow on YouTube. It's too circular, in my opinion. Um, so it's mostly like, okay, what topics are of interest? What topics are my audience, the algorithm, actually interested in? And then really just doubling down on the concepts that are working. So for me, it kind of, that's how I fell into this niche now where I make videos talking about like scams on the internet. Was I was making all these business videos, and then I thought, you know what? I'm going to share the story about the time that I hired a business coach who basically stole my money and taught me nothing, and see how it does. And at that point in time, that video outperformed any other video that I had been creating. So it was like, to me, that's a sign that this is something that people are actually interested in, and maybe I should talk about it more. And then that's kind of how I snowballed into that specific area of content. So if you're starting out, it's really like posting videos as an experiment, not being afraid to try different things, and then really just doubling down on whatever sticks.
So, as opposed to some people who say start a very specific niche from the beginning, you're saying start a little bit wider than that. Maybe try like 5 or 7 different things around one topic. And then if one or two of those things start working, then you can niche down after.
Exactly. So it is like there is a general niche umbrella, I guess, that you should pick. Like you shouldn't be talking about business and then also talking about fashion and talking about makeup. Like pick a general niche. And then I always refer to it as like the content pillars of that niche. So even when I had my yoga studio, I grew my entire clientele base through word of mouth and through Instagram. And I did that by having the umbrella niche of yoga, but then also talking about meditation, mindfulness, journaling, like things that relate back to yoga, but it's not just me being like, here are 5 yoga poses for back pain. It's like it keeps things interesting for your audience if you can figure out how to branch out under that one specific umbrella.
Okay. Yeah, it definitely makes sense. Yeah, I've been trying to do some of that. I've created a lot of different videos. I hid most of them now because they're so bad, but I think the interviews could work well. Obviously, exposing my audience to lots of different people with different opinions and smart advice that goes beyond what I know. Um, and it's just interesting talking with other people and things like that. So, as you mentioned, you have to pick something you enjoy that's sustainable, and interviewing different people obviously brings variety in there and will keep me motivated.
Definitely. And there's always so
Um,
much to learn. I think like another big piece of advice that I tell people is, and this is something that I even personally do to this day, specifically with YouTube, but it's like if I want to learn how to edit my videos better or like have better content, I take my inspiration from people who are in completely different industries. Because I think too often what happens is we consume a lot of the same content that we're creating, and you can kind of end up in like this echo chamber. So for me, I've found it really helpful to like watch people in the tech space or watch people in, I don't know, like lifestyle and see just like how do they edit their videos? What is their intro like that kind of thing, and learning from people that aren't doing the same thing I'm doing and finding things that like I can mirror in my own content.
Yeah, I think that's good. It helps you stand out. And I think there's a lot of people out there that they have a certain style and maybe their success isn't because of that style. So you're copying the wrong thing or something along those lines. Or there's an audience of people who could be interested in a certain subject, but they don't like how it's being done. So there's like everyone copies the most successful person. And then all of a sudden you can obviously find like a niche within a niche because you're presenting things maybe in a more informal format, whereas everyone's like chopping up their videos to the point where they're 3 minutes long and it's one word cut, one word cut, one word cut. I've noticed it's kind of excessive in how some people do that. Whereas maybe a conversational approach, I've noticed some of your live streams are like 1 or 2 hours long. So they're very in
Mm-hmm.
depth. You're responding to people and things like that. Um, some of the other like like business consultants and things like that might do just like shorter things, like less information, less in depth, less building a strong relationship with your audience. I've noticed that the people I've been watching like social media, I mean, YouTube was probably the first thing that I got into in 2005, shortly after it came out. So just watching that evolve over time, it seems like the people who could develop a deep connection with their audience were the ones who were able to sustain for more than 10 years. Whereas the other people, it was kind of like hit or miss. Like maybe their content was hot for like a year or two and then it's not. And they were getting like 200,000 views per video and now they're getting only like a few thousand because they didn't really develop a connection with the audience. So it seems like that's the most important thing for long-term success. Obviously, clickbait titles and things like that can kind of get you a few views in the short run. But what do you think about the balancing, like having content that's short enough and keeps people's attention with the longer content that can build a long-term deep relationship?
Honestly, I think it's more about evolving with the times. So the average lifespan of a YouTube channel is about 7 years, I think. And I think what I've seen happen to a lot of YouTubers, and this happens on other platforms as well, is like they find a format that works. That's what like blows up their channel. And then they just keep reproducing that same format over and over again. So whether that is a long form video, whether it's a video where they literally just stare at the camera and it's just them talking for 30 minutes straight, or it's like what you were talking about with like the jump cuts and all of that, like really interesting editing. If that works in the short term, that's great, but you need to pay attention as the audience starts to change and their interests start to change and your views start going down. Okay, what can I do to change the format or the delivery of this content? Like I spoke about this on TikTok the other day. Back in 2020, when I first started my TikTok, I could sit down and record a talking head video where I'm giving you, the 5 steps to start a business in Canada, and I could get 50,000 views overnight. Now I record that same video, I get 300 views. Well, it's because the format in which people want to consume their content has evolved, but the style of delivery that I'm using is still stuck back in 2020. So as a creator, it's really important, not so much like I'm not going to say, well, you should do 2-hour videos or you should do 5-minute videos, because that's so like niche dependent and audience dependent. It's more about, again, coming back to my original piece of advice. It's like experimenting with these different formats, longer, shorter, well edited, kind of just like thrown together, and seeing what your audience wants to see.
Yeah. If someone's looking to experiment, what percent of their content should they be producing on, say, a monthly basis? That's the stuff that has already proven to work or it worked in the past versus what percent would you say they should be experimenting with? Like maybe, let's just say 70% is what has already worked and then maybe 30% new stuff. I'm just throwing that out as an example. Do you have any like specific recommendations on that based on what's worked for you?
I don't really have like a specific percentage. Again, it really just comes down to watching those numbers. So I make a style of video, it does well. Okay, I duplicate that. It continues to do well. Once those numbers start to go down is when it's like, okay, maybe now's the time for me to try something different. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, just kind of changing pace a little bit. From a personal perspective, was there anything you needed to overcome in order to start the channel? Like a lot of people are frozen by anxiety or judgment or things like that. Was that something you had to overcome, or were there other logistical things?
I think for me, because I've been creating videos in some format for like well over a decade, I personally wasn't someone that was like, oh, well, like the editing seems so overwhelming. That's a comment I get quite often, is like the reason why people haven't started.
Right.
Um, but honestly, it's like any of those challenges that you're facing, whether it's, fear of talking to the camera, feeling like you don't know what you're talking about, not knowing how to edit your videos, the only way you're going to overcome that is by showing up and creating the videos. Like, it's all through repetition. It's the same if you want to, start a TikTok, start making Instagram reels, any of that. It's like it gets easier the more that you show up and do it. Like, if you go back and watch my videos from last July when I first started, I actually had one of my channel members comment this the other day. They're like, Danielle, like the way you talk is so different. You seem so uncomfortable in front of the camera. Like, there's so many things that evolve the more you start to create content and the more you become more comfortable with it. And like, even if you go back to my live videos or live videos I do now, half the time I'm figuring out how the technology works while I'm doing the live stream. Like, it's not about having everything in place and then getting started. It's kind of just like learning as you're going. So just being willing to start. And I mean, like, to this day, I still script every single one of my videos, like down to the word. So don't be afraid to utilize tools that you need in order to make it easier for you.
Okay. Yeah, so try to be as prepared as you can, but at some point you just gotta make it and launch it, get some feedback, look at the data, that sort of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I think for me, before I posted anything online, I did create like maybe 20 or 30 videos that I told myself I'm never planning on creating. So it was like I could just roll out of bed and look like hell and just make the video for like 5 or 10 minutes just to practice talking and get over that
That's great
initial,
too.
yeah.
Like, you don't have to post everything. You can just make videos for your own accord and watch them and kind of like take notes on yourself of like what you could improve.
Yeah, exactly. Or like start with just audio and not video. So then you're not focused on like tiny little things like, oh, my hair didn't look perfect or something like that. And then once you get the audio down, then you can move on to audio and video together.
For sure.
And then just work on like small things after that. But yeah, I've noticed that some of the people who are most successful are the most relatable. So they act, I'm not saying they intentionally like look bad or something like that, but they're not looking to make their lighting perfect and everything. That's definitely a strategy that can work well. It just depends on like what niche you're in, I guess, and what the audience is. But it seems like, especially because there's a lot of young people who during COVID and before that, as well as now, felt kind of socially isolated. They're almost making friends through the internet. So if you just come across as, oh, we're just like having a regular video chat like I would with a friend or something like that, that seems to be successful. Like there's a lot of like video game channels where they just play video games and just talk. And
Yeah.
it's as if you're playing with your friend. So that seems to be really successful. And those viewers tend to be loyal. And as you mentioned, you can kind of evolve over time with them and they'll stick with you, even if what you are currently doing doesn't work as well like 5 years from now, because maybe like the platform you were on is not as popular, but they'll shift with you. Whereas if you just create like videos that get a lot of views, but maybe there's not a deep connection with the audience, like it almost looks so professional, there's no like emotional or personal connection there with the audience, then that can make it a little bit more difficult to be sustainable or switch to different platforms or things of that nature. How much of your strategy on different platforms, like content creation on different platforms, is planned out, say, like a month in advance? Or you say, this is what I want to do this quarter, like this 3 month period, versus just kind of like on a daily basis, just making content and then repurposing it for different platforms? Like, how do you balance strategy versus spontaneity?
For sure. So mostly I try not to actually plan. Well, with YouTube, I'll plan like a month in advance. Most of the other platforms, I just do week to week because so much changes in that time period that it's really hard, especially with apps like TikTok and Instagram. It comes back to this idea of like the formats changing and what people are interested in are changing. Trends change so quickly that, in my opinion, it's not really effective to have this like 4 month or 3 month plan, because by the time it gets to the end of December, like the whole landscape's going to have changed. Now, obviously, if you're trying to like sell products and stuff, the approach becomes a little bit different because you have to have that intentionality to lead up to whatever it is you're selling. But um, I really think it's mostly just like, okay, what would be fun to talk about? Okay, and then I just map it out on my content calendar and kind of figure it out week to week. Like, usually on Friday, I'll sit down and plan out the following week. But I know some people prefer to do further in advance, but it really just depends on your schedule, I guess, and what you have time to manage.
When analyzing metrics, have you noticed that like the first 3 to 6 hours that you post or 24 hours has like a strong correlation to how successful the video does overall? Or do you have some that pop off quick and then go down to basically zero, whereas others are more like flat and sustainable and like keep getting views months into the future, but might have not had that initial pop to it?
Yeah, it's interesting because to this day, I still haven't figured it out. Like some videos will have like the steepest curve and then they just completely flatline. And then I had a video I posted last week that underperformed. I think it came, so like with YouTube Studio, it'll tell you like what number it performed out of your last 10 uploads. And it was like number 7 or something. So it performed like 7th out of my last 10 uploads. Then I checked it yesterday and it's at like number 2 out of 10. So, and if you look at the graph, it literally like was way under and then just like shot up. And it's the same with that video that went viral for me. It didn't pop off until a month after I had uploaded it. And I didn't change the title, I didn't change the thumbnail. So, like, I don't know if people just happen to be searching that phrase on that particular day in May, but I have yet to figure out, what the secret is because just when I think I've figured it out, the opposite happens of what I expect. So,
Yeah, they could be YouTube or whatever platform you're using could be continuously experimenting with the algorithm. So they
mhm.
might change it like every 3 months, but they also might be like, oh, on this Tuesday, we'll just randomly try set it to be a little bit different to see if we can get a group that's not currently engaged on the platform to be more engaged or something like that. Yeah, it's a little bit of a mystery, I would say. I think they want it to be a mystery. Like none of
Yeah.
these platforms want you to know how the algorithm works. But my initial instinct would be if you make a video that's specific to your subscribers, then it probably would do better in the initial like day or two and then peter off. Whereas if it's something that's more general, maybe outside the subscribers that fits to a more general audience, then it might not take off at first because your subscribers aren't as engaged with it. But then there's a much bigger audience it could eventually reach. So yeah, also I think with just looking back and listening to other people, sometimes someone shares it and you don't know it, so they might have like put it on a website or just like talked about it or like mentioned it. And if you can get that initial, like you can go from like 500 people watching it to a few thousand, especially if they come from an outside source. Like a lot of the platforms will reward that significantly. So I do wonder if maybe that happened with one of your videos where someone else talked
Yeah.
about it or something.
Yeah, like I've heard of people hitting like the Reddit homepage, for example, and then their video suddenly they were getting 500 views and now they have 500,000. So it's like anything is possible.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what we all hope for. Some famous person shares it and has millions of people. Elon Musk
Yeah.
shares it on Twitter, and then you'll probably get a few views from that.